Good morning, everyone. I want to first thank the panelists for all being here, and as we begin our subcommittee on energy and mineral resources, I hope it comes to order. We're meeting today to hear testimony on the policies and priorities of the Bureau of Land Management, or the BLM, the United States Forest Service, and the Power Marketing Associations. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member or their designees. I'm going to ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objections, so ordered. As I mentioned last week, when we had the offshore drilling agencies testifying for the past 2 years, the Department of Interior has discarded environmental and public health policies and made it clear to us that its top priority is the single-minded pursuit of, quotes, energy dominance. Energy dominance means letting oil and gas and mining industries do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want to do on our federal lands, on our public lands. Energy dominance means letting oil and gas and coal lobbyists write the rules from outside and inside the department. Energy dominance means treating public health, clean air, clean water, local opinions, hunting, fishing, camping, and conservation as annoying conveniences, or inconveniences, really. These should be sacrificed or ignored in the name of getting more oil, gas, and coal out of the ground. Energy dominance is also a built-in contradiction, a nonsensical argument that perfectly fits President Trump's compulsion to see himself both as the most powerful and also the most persecuted at the exact same time. The administration brags about being the #1 oil producer in the world, but poor them, they're also so burdened by awful federal laws and regulations. The administration and my colleagues across the aisle say Trump has unleashed American supremacy, and we have become the lords of energy creation. But when it comes to public lands and waters, they act like poor orphans begging for a little bit more gruel. Please, sir, I want more ocean to drill in. Please, sir, I want more lands to drill in next to national parks. Please, sir, I want to use more sacred and pristine wilderness. No matter the price, no matter the place, no matter the point, they always want some more. We could go back and forth up here forever about statistics and who should get the so-called credit for this. In fact, as many members know, we already have. For years in this committee, we have pointed out that production on public lands and waters has gone up as much, if not more, on a percentage basis than the country as a whole. And that was under President Obama. We don't have many stats for Trump yet. It's probably still going up. I imagine to many of my colleagues, Trump will get all the credit for that. And certainly, they will not give President Obama any credit. We could parse individual years and oil versus gas and onshore versus offshore, but it doesn't matter. The undisputed fact is oil production nearly doubled under President Obama, and it's still going up. So let's look at the chart of skyrocketing oil production and ask ourselves, why do oil companies need more public land? Why do they need more of our oceans? ask yourselves, is gutting health and safety regulations really necessary? Is letting the industry call the shots really necessary? Is shutting off public comment, rubber stamping permits, and drilling in areas that have been untouched for millennia really necessary? For individual oil companies that want to develop massive bonuses to their executives, sure it helps. If you're a struggling CEO getting by on, say, $10 million a year, then a few extra $1 million can make you sure that all of your children have a yacht, and that matters. But for the American public, it's a raw deal, because America is not a company. It may seem like President Trump is trying to treat us like one, like many of his other companies, and let us run it into the ground. But America is a country, not a company. And America's lands are not excess inventory that need to be disposed of. Our natural resources are not reserves that need to be booked, so our stock prices stay high and our investors stay happy. Our public lands are an investment that we're holding for our grandchildren and their grandchildren and generations beyond. They are an investment that pays off by allowing them to know, our grandchildren, great-children, what vast stretches of untainted wilderness look like. That lets them see with their own eyes polar bears, sage grouse, mule deer, and caribou running wild and free. That lets them learn about ancient native cultures without having to go to a museum, and lets some cultures continue to observe and respect the same traditions that their ancestors have. These are all priceless, they're irreplaceable, and these are all infinitely more important than whatever extra few dollars can line an oil baron's pocket over the next few years. I just hope our land management agencies still understand that. With that, I look forward to the testimony from our witnesses, and I now recognize our ranking member, my dear friend, Representative Gosar, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for yielding, and thanks for all the witnesses for coming today. We're here today to discuss policies and priorities of the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, and the 4 power marketing administrators, each of which plays an important role in onshore energy development and providing reliable, affordable energy to the American people. We are truly experiencing an energy renaissance in this country. Domestic oil production hit an all-time high in 2018, and the U.S. is now a net exporter of energy for the first time in 65 years. Expanded development of our onshore oil and gas resources, including the newly discovered reserves in the Permian Basin, along with the safer and more efficient extraction techniques, is making domestic energy independence a reality. The BLM is responsible for managing and regulating the development of oil, natural gas, coal, and hard rock minerals, as well as renewable energy on federal lands. Policies implemented during the Obama administration significantly hampered energy development, causing production on federal lands to lag far behind the production quantity on state and private lands. The Trump administration has taken several actions to reduce costs and encourage all forms of production on federal lands. The Department of Interior has repealed or revised onerous regulations, taken several steps to streamline the oil and gas leasing and permitting process, and even lifted a damaging Obama-era ban on new federal coal leases. Even so, in fiscal year 2017, federal lands contributed only 7% of all oil, 9% of natural gas, and 6% of natural gas liquids produced in the U.S. Similarly, very little renewable energy generation occurs on federal lands. In 2017, over 98% of wind projects were located on private lands. Further, reforms under the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy are needed to remedy the disparity in federal and non-federal energy production. Now, regarding non-fuel mineral development, domestic hard rock mining gives us essential minerals used in industries across the country, including telecommunications, infrastructure, and renewable energy development. Despite substantial domestic reserves, most of our critical minerals comes from foreign imports, particularly China. The Trump administration began to address the need for a steady domestic supply with Executive Order 13817, and the Department of Interior published a list of 35 critical minerals soon after. Compared to last year, 2 fewer minerals were imported at a rate greater than 50% in 2018, and 3 fewer were imported at a rate of 100%. This actually suggests the administration's steps are already yielding positive results. Now, unfortunately, acquiring necessary mining permit is a confusing, time-consuming, and expensive process, largely due to overly burdensome NEPA requirements. Final permitting approval may take 7 to 10 years, while countries like Canada and Australia can manage this process in about 2. Added to permitting uncertainty is the threat of sudden, unnecessary mineral withdrawals. The Obama administration made multiple decisions to unilaterally remove public lands from mineral entry. Great strides have been taken by the Trump administration to reverse these withdrawals, such as the cancellation of the previous administration's political 10 million acre withdrawal in the western United States, but much remains to be done. Committee Democrats are now trying to permanently withdraw over 1 million acres of public land in my home state of Arizona. Chairman Grijalva's H.R. 1373 is a misguided attempt to remove some of the country's largest tracts of uranium deposits from mining consideration. The area in question is far outside the Grand Canyon, and this uncalled-for land grab threatens American energy security and removes the good-paying mining jobs that may have resulted from responsible uranium development. Now, regarding PMAs, WAPA is one of the 4 power marketing administrations that delivers hydropower and related services from federal facilities to nearly 700 preferred customers that include federal and state agencies, cities, electric cooperatives, tribes, as well as public utility and irrigation districts. For years, power consumers and Congress have been asking WAPA to be transparent with its budget, cost, and rate. Last Congress, the House unanimously passed my bipartisan Western Area Power Administration Transparency Act. I am proud that the aforementioned efforts have led to increased sunshine at WAPA and the agency's disclosing information online through the source on the agency's use of budget, costs, and rates since 2008. However, there is still more work to be done, and WAPA should continue to take steps to build trust with its customers and shed additional light on its cost rates and operations. I look forward to discussing how the administration is promoting the development of our abundant onshore energy resources and providing our constituents with affordable, reliable energy. Again, I thank the witnesses for being here today, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to have unanimous consent for non-subcommittee members to participate. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I will now introduce today's witnesses. First, we have Mr. Mike Ned, the Acting Deputy Director of Operations at the Bureau of Land Management. Next, we have Mr. Chris French, Acting Deputy Chief of the National Forest System at the U.S. Forest Service. Next is Mr. Elliot Mainzer, Administrator of the Bonneville Power Administration. Then we have Mr. Kenneth Legg, Administrator of the Southeastern Power Administration. Then we have Mr. Mike Way, Administrator of the Southwestern Power Administration. And finally, we have Mr. Mark Gabriel, Administrator of the Western Area Power Administration. I'd like to remind all witnesses that they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the lights on the witness table will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I will ask you to please, when that happens, to complete your statement. I will allow the entire panel to testify before questioning any witnesses. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ned to testify.
Good morning, Chairman Lowenthal and Ranking Member Gosar, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to join you today to discuss the Bureau of Land Management's policies, priorities, and accomplishment related to our onshore energy and minerals program. The Bureau manages about 245 million acres surface acres, located primarily in the 12 western states, as well as 30% of the nation's minerals. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act set forth the BLM's mission to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the public lands for the multiple use and enjoyment of present and future generations. This includes activities such as conventional and renewable energy development, livestock grazing, hunting and fishing, mining, and resource conservation. Partnerships are critical in carrying out the Bureau's multiple-use mission. A great example is the Wyoming Landscape Conservation Initiative, a long-term science-based collaborative effort to assess the enhanced aquatic and terrestrial habitat at a landscape scale in southwest Wyoming, while facilitating responsible development in some of the country's most abundant oil and natural gas reserves. The administration has made environmentally responsible development of all of the above domestic energy source and minerals a priority. In response to a number of executive and secretarial orders, the BLM has improved environmental reviews and permitting authorization for energy and infrastructure projects. The BLM also reviewed regulations related to energy and minerals development on public lands, resulting in several rulemaking and policy changes. These changes included rescinding the 2015 hydraulic fracking rule, issuing revised leasing reform policy, removing the 2015 moratorium on federal coal leases, and revising the 2016 waste prevention rule. We are proud of the priorities established over the past 2 years and the many policies we have implemented to promote sustainable and responsible energy and mineral development from the nation's public land. Thanks to these efforts, public lands are contributing to our nation's energy prosperity. The BLM's federal onshore oil and natural gas program encompasses approximately 96,000 active wells on about 24,000 producing leases spanning over 26 million acres of surfaces. In FY 2017, this program alone was estimated to provide $59.6 billion in economic output and 284,000 jobs nationwide. Under the department's commitment to responsible energy development, the BLM now consistently conducts quarterly lease sale. The 28th oil and gas lease sale held in calendar year 2018 resulted in 1,412 parcels leased, covering almost 1.5 million acres. In 2018, production from federal land generated in excess of $3 billion in federal royalties, rental payments, and bonuses bid, nearly half of which were shared with the state where the oil and gas activity is occurring. For example, a recent lease sale in New Mexico broke all previous records, grossing nearly $1 billion in bonus bids, approximately half of which went to the state of New Mexico. Facilitating energy transmission is a critical component of the BLM's mission to achieve energy security. The BLM manages a total of 118,000 right-of-way grants issued for a variety of use, including electrical power generation, transmission, broadband, and pipeline. Finally, non-energy and critical minerals development on federal land is essential to the American economy. In FY 2018, non-energy mineral produced from federal land generated $13.4 billion to the economy and supported an estimated 48,000 jobs. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my oral statement. I will be glad to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Ned, and now the chair recognizes Mr. French to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the invitation here to discuss the Forest Service role in oil and gas leasing and mining. The Forest Service mission is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands, to meet the needs of present and future generations. National forests and grasslands have an essential role in contributing to a stable national supply of mineral and energy resources while conserving the land's productivity and ecological sustainability. Delivering dependable energy and providing jobs and economic benefits for rural communities is a key priority for our agency. The nation's forests and grasslands play an essential role in providing an adequate, affordable, and stable supply of mineral and energy resources to American industry and the American people. It's part of our multiple-use mission. Energy and mineral production from national forests and grasslands contributes approximately $5 billion annually to the gross domestic product and supports nearly 32,000 jobs. While delivering these benefits, we take seriously our responsibility to protect the water quality and surface resources of national forests and grasslands during mining operations and ensure proper restoration of mineral extraction. Accordingly, the Forest Service strives to ensure that exploration, development, and production of mineral and energy resources are conducted in an environmentally sensitive manner, and that these activities are integrated with the planning and management of other resources. We strive to facilitate the orderly exploration, development, and production of mineral and energy resources within the National Forest System on lands open to these activities or on withdrawn lands consistent with valid existing rights. We strive to maintain opportunities to access mineral and energy resources which are important to sustain viable rural economies and to contribute to the national defense and economic growth. And we strive to ensure that lands disturbed by mineral and energy activities, both past and present, are reclaimed using the best scientific knowledge and principles and returned to other productive uses. The Forest Service Energy and Minerals Program has a broad list of responsibilities, but for the moment, I'd like to just focus on our administration of federal leases and mining claims and how we work with other federal agencies, particularly the Bureau of Land Management. The Forest Service works closely with the BLM in the administration and management of leasable minerals, which includes oil and natural gas. The Mineral Leasing Law splits responsibilities between the Forest Service and the BLM for leases on national forests and grasslands. Our responsibility starts with the determination as to whether to make any given national forest or grassland available for leasing. These availability decisions are informed by public input and environmental analysis as required by the National Environmental Policy Act. Subsequently, the agency notifies the BLM of specific lands that are available for lease. For any leasing decisions approved by the BLM, the Forest Service continues to be responsible for managing surface resources and regulating all surface-disturbing activities. Leasable minerals are important to local economies. For example, in 2017, returned to the Treasury, states and counties from Forest Service leasable minerals underlying our lands totaled an estimated $385 million. If we look beyond leasable minerals, coordination with the BLM is also key in the management and administration of locatable minerals, as determined by the 1872 mining law. These include gold, copper, and other minerals such as that. Mining claims are filed with the BLM, and the Forest Service regulates and oversees the mining operations to ensure the protection of surface resources. Locatable minerals are not required to report production to the government or pay rents or royalties as required with leasable minerals. However, these operations contribute economic impacts to local communities. For example, in 2016, based on industry end-of-the-year reports, revenue generated from mines on national forests and grasslands totaled more than $1 billion. Currently, my agency administers mining operations on more than 6,000 federal leases and 75,000 mining claims. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions from you or the subcommittee going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. French. The chair now recognizes Mr. Mainzer to testify. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, members of the subcommittee. I'm Elliot Mainzer, Administrator and Chief Executive Officer of the Bonneville Power Administration. BPA is the Federal Power Marketing Administration serving the Pacific Northwest. We market the power generated at 31 federal dams and the Columbia Generating Station nuclear plant. We also own and operate 3/4 of the high-voltage transmission in our region, including the interties that connect the Northwest with Canada and California. This morning, I would like to briefly report on Bonneville's financial condition and then touch on several pending policy and strategy issues. BPA's financial position is sound. The agency is entirely self-financed through its rates for power and transmission services and receives no federal appropriations. In 2018, BPA completed its annual payment to the U.S. Treasury of $862 million. This payment represents 35 consecutive years of full and timely repayment to U.S. taxpayers for their investments in the Northwest Federal Power and Transmission System. The nation's major independent credit rating agencies maintain very high ratings on non-federal debt backed by Bonneville, and I am proud that after careful management of our cost structure, BPA has proposed power rate increases for 2020 and 2021 that are less than the rate of inflation. Looking forward, our financial condition and long-term costs are of paramount importance to me and the Northwest utilities that BPA serves. The affordability of federal power is a cornerstone of the economic vitality of communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. Our current long-term power contracts are up for renewal in 2028. Our customers want to know they can renew their contracts with confidence in Bonneville's long-term commercial viability. To that end, BPA is executing on its 2018 through 2023 strategic plan. We released this plan last year with 4 primary objectives: to strengthen financial health, to modernize assets and system operations, to provide competitive products and services, and to meet transmission customer needs efficiently and responsively. We are executing on each of these goals. I will highlight a few achievements and topics of particular focus. With respect to strengthening financial health, in 2018, we updated BPA's financial reserves policy. This policy defines the amount of reserves our power and transmission business lines should hold and the actions to take when reserves fall below or exceed certain levels. Because Bonneville operates entirely from its power and transmission revenues, our disciplined management of reserves improves our financial stability. We also adopted a new leverage policy to manage BPA's outstanding debt relative to the value of its assets. In addition to keeping our power rates low, we have offered a rate settlement for transmission and ancillary service in the next rate period and are optimistic that we will reach agreement with our transmission customers. We also reached agreement with transmission customers on a revised open access transmission tariff. This will help us to meet the transmission needs of the region more efficiently and responsively. As the steward of robust but aging assets, we continue to collaborate with our federal partners, the Corps of Engineers and Bureau of Reclamation, on an asset investment plan to ensure the long-term affordability and reliability of the hydropower system. We are also pursuing discussions with these partners about the growing demands on the multiple purposes of the hydropower projects and the allocation of costs among these purposes. We see in some instances that the formula for cost allocation may not reflect revised operating requirements and the associated benefits. Broad change is underway in the electricity industry in the Western United States. These changes are driven by state policies for clean electricity generation and evolving market designs to optimize a changing resource mix. Bonneville is responding to these changes with a comprehensive grid modernization initiative. This includes a focus on commercial and operational modernization and a careful evaluation of the costs and benefits of BPA joining the Western energy imbalance market. Our strategy is based on operating a commercially successful business while meeting our public responsibilities, of which our environmental obligations are central. This year, we reached an important agreement with multiple Northwest states, tribes, and other federal partners to test flexible spring spill operations at Columbia and Snake River dams when juvenile fish are migrating to the ocean. This agreement is expected to stay ongoing litigation while the region completes a major environmental review of Columbia River system operations. Finally, I can report that official negotiations for the future of the Columbia River Treaty with Canada are underway. Bonneville is working with the U.S. State Department, the Corps, Bureau of Reclamation, and NOAA in support of these negotiations. As the negotiations continue, the State Department expects to continue to hold periodic public meetings to inform the many interested parties in the Pacific Northwest of its progress. This concludes my testimony, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions from the subcommittee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mainzer. The chair now recognizes Mr. Legg to testify.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee, I am Kenneth Legg, Administrator of the Southeastern Power Administration. I am honored to appear before you this morning. With a staff of 44 full-time employees, Southeastern markets approximately 3,400 megawatts of power produced at 22 multiple-purpose projects operated and maintained by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Last year, Southeastern sold approximately 7 billion kilowatt hours of energy to 485 wholesale customers, with revenue totaling $307 million. Regional program benefits reached over 12 million homes and businesses. Our rates are formulated to recover costs of program operation and maintenance, purchase power and transmission expenses, and amortized capital investments. Southeastern delivers federal hydroelectric power at the lowest possible cost, consistent with sound business principles, to public bodies and cooperatives. In December 2017 and early 2018, 11 of SEPA's Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina system customers notified us of their desire to terminate their federal power contracts, representing approximately 85 megawatts of hydroelectric generation. Southeastern solicited interest in receiving supplemental allocations among other customers in that marketing system. We received positive responses from 63 customers across the 5-state region. Southeastern was able to make the necessary transmission service changes, expediting most of the terminations and beginning supplemental allocation deliveries as early as January 1st, 2019. All power will be marketed with no loss in revenue prior to contract terminations of these former customers. The Water Resources Development Act of 2000 enabled hydropower customers to provide the core funding to improve generation infrastructure reliability and capability. Since 2004, Southeastern has transferred $518 million of power sales receipts to accomplish hydropower equipment replacements and renewals. One of the memoranda of agreements that support those equipment rehabilitations was recently amended to facilitate work now being performed across all 4 rate systems. Southeastern maintains a cooperative working relationship with its preference customers and the Corps. Financial and operational issues are discussed regularly among members of the Southeastern Federal Power Alliance and Team Cumberland, which were established in 1991 and 1992, respectively. Over the past 2.5 years, over the past 2.5 years, fellow administrators and I have met with Corps commanding generals to discuss topics critical to the sustainability of our respective federal hydroelectric power systems. Areas for potential cost reduction include contracting strategies, cost accounting, water storage program administration, and O&M staffing efficiencies. In 2018, the effort was expanded to also include the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. In spite of efforts to keep program costs as low as we can so that our rates will be competitive in today's power marketplace, those rates continue to go higher. To a large extent, this is the result of increased costs of repayment for infrastructure rehabilitation that was long past due. We are very aware that other renewables and energy produced with low-priced natural gas provide attractive alternatives to hydropower. Keeping our rates competitive while meeting repayment obligations will continue to be a critical issue for Southeastern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. This concludes my presentation of Southeastern Power Administration's program policies and priorities. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Legg. The chair now recognizes Mr. Way to testify.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I am Mike Way, Administrator of the Southwestern Power Administration. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. For over 75 years, Southwestern has worked with Congress, our customers, and other stakeholders to successfully market and deliver federal hydropower at the lowest cost consistent with sound business principles. As one of 4 power marketing administrations in the nation, Southwestern markets a little over 2,000 megawatts of capacity from 24 multi-purpose projects owned by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. On average, Southwestern markets 5.6 million megawatt hours of energy each year, bringing in about $200 million in revenue. This revenue comes directly from the rates we charge our customers. It's used to repay the investment with interest in the facilities we operate and the personnel we employ to run our program. In short, Southwestern recovers every penny we spend through the rates we charge our customers. We serve 102 customers. They, in turn, serve another 10 million end users in Arkansas, Kansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Texas, and Oklahoma. Within our region, our system of reservoirs is almost entirely dependent upon rainfall. Water storage is measured in months, not years. When drought occurs, we must purchase power to replace the hydropower that cannot be generated so that we can continue meeting our obligations to our customers. To fund these purchases, we have historically relied upon congressional authority to use our receipts over the long term, across good water years and bad. Purchase power and wheeling balances have been available to Southwestern so that we can achieve rate stability for our customers. This authority is critical to operating our program according to sound business principles. Sound business principles also mean keeping costs down. Historically, leasing our headquarters in Tulsa, Oklahoma has been a big expense. We've done the research that shows buying or building a facility instead of leasing will save our ratepayers $12 to $18 million. Once implemented, this would be one of the biggest cost savings in the agency's history, resulting in significant downward pressure on our customer rates. Another way to realize long-term cost savings is through investment in the nation's infrastructure. Our well-established customer funding program facilitates investment in the core hydropower generating plants, and I am happy to report that our ratepayers have approved nearly $750 million to repair and rehabilitate this critical infrastructure to date. As for investment in the transmission system, Southwestern has long-term construction plans to prioritize how we spend our money while keeping costs down, and we work with our regional partners to make sure our investment program aligns with regional planning initiatives. We are also engaged with our national and regional utility partners in making sure that electrical demand is met even in crisis situations. Southwestern plans and trains to respond to bulk power system interruptions and physical and cyber security threats. We also participate in regional power system restoration exercises with the Southwest Power Pool and in national drills such as the North American Electric Reliability Corporation GridX program. This kind of training gives us the chance to demonstrate how we would respond to and recover from simulated coordinated threats and incidents, and allows us to strengthen crisis communication skills while evaluating lessons learned. I would like to end my testimony with some heartfelt thanks to the dedicated staff at Southwestern, to our customers, to the Department of Energy, and to our partners at the Corps of Engineers. I thank them for their support and their commitment. And finally, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you about the state of Southwestern Power Administration today. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to address any questions you or members of the subcommittee would have.
Thank you, Mr. Way. And now the chair recognizes Mr. Gabriel to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Mark Gabriel. I'm the administrator of the Western Area Power Administration, and I am pleased to speak with you today regarding the status of WAPA as we continue to invest in a connected energy future. In 2018, WAPA delivered more than 27 billion kilowatt hours of at-cost hydroelectric power to customers. This power supports the prosperity and vitality of rural economies, Native American tribes, irrigation districts, and other customers who serve more than 40 million Americans in the West. Last year, around 80% of our nearly 700 customers experienced stable or decreased rates. WAPA's rates are often among the lowest in the country. Since 2013, we have returned $1.8 billion to the Treasury to recover the original investment in dam and energy infrastructure. WAPA employees were activated to support power restoration in Hawaii, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands as part of the Federal Energy Management Agency's disaster response teams. We responded to July's Carr fire in Northern California, which directly affected WAPA's system. In an unprecedented situation, 15 transmission lines and 8 substations were out of service. Despite the challenges, we continued supplying power to the area, working with utilities to keep as many people energized as possible. One of the most significant challenges facing the energy industry today is the targeting of electric infrastructure by those who wish to disrupt America's economy and society. In 2018, cybersecurity tools identified more than 10,000 individual cases of suspicious activities in our system. WAPA's firewalls are pinged nearly 200,000 times daily by suspicious or potentially damaging events. In addition, we have completed more than 345 physical security assessments since 2014 and will complete all asset risk assessments in 2019. As our security posture matures, we are optimizing on the interdependencies between cybersecurity, physical security, and asset management programs. We look at grid security holistically so that each effort complements and strengthens the other to better assign limited resources and achieve more effective protection for our extensive assets and contain costs. WAPA participates in and hosts numerous forums to improve security. Our 2018 Technology and Security Symposium looked at threats and leading practices broadly, while a smaller meeting focused on the convergence of operational and information technologies to better promote resilience of certain grid components. WAPA is exploring new technologies that could improve efficiency, security, and effectiveness of the electric grid, including agreements regarding unused fiber capacity and incorporating artificial intelligence into suitable business practices. Participating in these initiatives will help us keep pace with industry developments, modernize the grid, and invest in a connected energy future. WAPA is evaluating its operational risk and vulnerability to wildfires. Our thorough vegetation management programs mitigate unnecessary risk, but more can be done. We're reviewing these programs for adequacy and accuracy, given what we now know about wildfire prevention, and taking steps with our state and federal partners to ensure what we are doing can prevent forest fires from power lines. With $4.3 billion in assets, WAPA represents one of the top 10 largest transmission organizations in the nation. Annually, we invest around $1.3 billion to deliver on our mission. We need to make well-informed, prudent, realistic decisions about how to invest in our infrastructure to support future needs. In the next 10 years, we anticipate investing $1.6 billion in assets, the largest investment since the infrastructure was originally built in the mid-20th century. WAPA continues to work with customers to flatten peaks in anticipated spending and provide attainable financial expectations. The bulk of the reinvestment will maintain and upgrade the backbone transmission assets in our system, including more than 100,000 structures along 17,000 miles of high-voltage transmission lines, 322 substations, and 291 high-voltage transformers. Our asset management program is looking to more efficiently acquire large power transformers by cutting the lead time for procurement in half. This effort will support life cycle replacements and periodic system additions and allow WAPA to more quickly recover from an unexpected loss of power transformers, including a high-impact and low-frequency event. In today's increasingly complex and connected world, success requires close collaboration and mutually beneficial partnerships to preserve the value of WAPA. Through transparent and respectful partnerships with our customers and others, we can invest appropriately in a connected energy future and ensure our ability to supply premier power and transmission services at the lowest cost consistent with sound business principles. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you or the subcommittee members may have.
Mr. Gabriel, and I thank the panel for their testimony. I want to remind members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chairman will now recognize members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Ned, the administration is currently renewing 2 mining leases right next to the Boundary Waters Wilderness in Minnesota. These are 2 leases that the Obama administration had canceled. And it just so happens that the mining company who owns these leases, their CEO is Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump's landlord right here in Washington, D.C. I now want to discuss these leases. Mr. Ned, when Do you recall when you first discussed the issue of these leases with the incoming administration?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have an exact date, but I realize it was sometime in 2017. There was a discussion of all the issues and priorities that is ongoing.
So thank you. Do you recall who from the incoming Trump administration first discussed the issue with you?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a specific recollection. I brief a number of the incoming leadership, so I don't have a specific recollection of individual.
Well, from documents that have already been released, we know that in early February of 2017, you sent out a briefing memo on this topic, which was entitled Withdrawal Options. Will you provide this committee with the memo by the end of this week?
Mr. Chairman, I certainly will take that back and ensure that the committee or you, Mr. Chairman, get the information you're asking for.
So you will commit to that?
Mr. Chairman, I will take back your request to the Department of Interior, and they will process that request.
Well, thank you. Let's fast forward from February to December now of 2017. The then Deputy Solicitor General, the Deputy Solicitor, not the Deputy Solicitor, Daniel Giorgiani, he wrote an opinion that overturned a 2016 legal memo, and he concluded that Interior had no right to cancel the leases. In Giorgiani's memo, he states, and I quote, "The historical record of the 1966 lease implementations shows that production was not made a condition of renewal. These leases are now 50 years old, over 50 years, but they've never entered production. Is that not correct?"
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the specifics, but I believe they were meeting due diligence.
Yes, but they have not entered production.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the specific detail about that. Be glad to get back to you.
Well, I have, but Mr. Giorgiani is saying that that doesn't matter. They have sat on these leases for 50 years, but since no one has ever said that they had to be producing from them in order to get renewed, they automatically get renewed. Do I have that right?
Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the lease had a renewal clause in it, and based on the solicitor opinion, they were entitled to renew it.
Yes, that's what your opinion is. Well, then I'd like to put into the record a press release, and I'm going to enter it without objection, from the Department of Interior. And that press release was issued in 1966 when the first issuance of these condition of renewal, when we first talked about granting leases for nickel and copper mining. And it says in this press release by the Department of Interior, dated June 24th, 1966, referring to these mines that we're talking about granting leases for these mines for copper mining. It says that if the property, these leases are renewable, if the property is brought into production within the initial 20-year term. If the property was brought into production, they could be then then renewed. Were you aware of this press release prior to Mr. Giorgiani's opinion being published that says that no production was ever in part of the lease?
Mr. Chairman, I was aware of a number of documents. I can't specifically
I'm
speak to that
talking about the press release that specifically says that production must occur within the first 20 years. If you want me to read it specifically, it says they grant mining rights to the company for 20 years, renewable for 30 years at 10-year intervals if the property is brought into production within the initial 20-year period. You're not aware of that?
Again, Mr. Chairman, I became aware of that, but your question was, were I aware of it before the opinion was issued? I said I don't have a recollection when I become aware of it.
Would you agree then that this contradicts Mr. Giorgiani's argument that production was not made a condition of renewal, and if you were aware of this?
I would agree there is a press release and there is an opinion from the solicitor, Mr. Chairman.
Well, the solicitor now, there is an opinion you're talking about.
Which is our lawyers, Mr. Chairman, yes.
But you are aware that this contradicts, this statement from the Department of Interior contradicts Mr. Giorgiani's argument?
Again, I'm aware that the solicitor took all the documents or everything into consideration, issued their opinion, so thank you, Mr.
Well, I'm going to stop now. I will continue if we go through a second round. Thank you. Now I ask, provide 5 minutes of questioning to the ranking member.
That'd be Bruce Weston.
Thank you. We'll pass that on to Mr. Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. As we consider energy production and mineral production on federal lands, I think the ranking member brought out a very significant statistic that even in 2017, less than 10% of all of our U.S. energy production was on federal lands. And it's been talked about the previous administration. I would say because of technology and innovation, the private sector increased our energy production in spite of the previous administration, not because of the previous administration. As we look at federal lands, there's also very little renewables produced on federal lands. Less than 2% of renewable energy comes off of our federal lands. There's a report that shows that there's as much as about 368 million dry tons of biomass that will be available every year off of federal lands. That's 368 million tons of dry biomass is equivalent to about 55 billion gallons of gasoline, which is about 38% of the U.S. production or consumption. Or it's also equivalent to about 264 million tons of coal, which is also about 38% of the consumption of U.S. coal. I also saw a report that said that, in a good year off of federal lands, which produced about 200,000 tons of biomass for energy, which is less than 0.5% of the available biomass that's out there. Mr. French, what's the Forest Service doing or other federal land management agencies doing to utilize this renewable resource that we have on our federal lands? And also, we see these catastrophic wildfires every year where this fuel is going up in flames. Is there some way we can capture that and utilize it as a renewable energy source?
Thank you, Congressman. As you point out, this is a great untapped resource. It meets two needs. One, this overwhelming risk that we have across our national forests to reduce fire risk, to thin our forests so they're more resilient to natural disasters such as fire, insect, and disease. And so there's this natural connection, I think, that we have here. Our challenge has been finding the markets for that biomass and effectively bringing that biomass to market. So for us, we're very focused on providing grants to partners that are willing to help us market this material, working very closely with our shared stewardship support with states to, again, create incentives of how to use this biomass more effectively. It's been the centerpiece of our large collaborative forest landscape restoration program, where the utilization of biomass has been a key part of delivering that large program. It's a win-win for us because it reduces the risk to fuels and it provides a renewable, long-term energy source for the American public.
And I know as the Japanese are replacing their nuclear power generation stations, they have a tremendous demand for wood pellets and woody biomass, and it seems like, especially in the West where our forests are so unhealthy, there ought to be some kind of synergy there to harvest that biomass, and if we can't use it here, to at least export it where there are good markets for it. Also, when we talk about these catastrophic wildfires, There are more and more Americans living in the wildland-urban interface. I know that not all the land around the wildland-urban interface is federal land. I think about 50% of it nationwide is federal land. But what's the Forest Service doing to help make the wildland-urban interface a safer place to live, to protect property and lives? And what could be done with programs like state and private forestry to help that area?
Thank you, Congressman. It is that key critical area that we have. It's where we find some of the highest risk to our communities and to water resources. We very specifically are working through state and federal agencies, working with our communities to make them fire safe, to harden those committees. We do that through granting to the states and to local communities. The initiative that we put forward on shared stewardship is specifically focused on that risk and the matrix of lands, both state, private, and federal lands, and that fire does not necessarily respect some geographic or administrative boundary, that we have to be working together and pose solutions at the right scope with the right set of partners. And so we've been working on a state-by-state basis to focus on where those highest risks are and how we collaboratively work together to resolve those.
Yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the chairman of the committee, Chair Grijalva,
very
for
much.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and to the panelists. Thank you very much for your testimony. And Mr. French, of course, thank you for your professional career in the agency. Mr. French, as you probably know, the Forest Service is currently being sued by 3 Arizona tribes and other groups over the proposed Rosemont mine in the Santa Rita Mountains. Those 3 tribes, the Otham Nation, Pasquayaqui Nation, the Hopi tribe, are trying to protect sacred sites, which their studies and obviously their opinion in the litigation is that they are in severe danger if the mine goes forward. At this point, Mr. French, are you willing to commit that until this litigation is concluded, that the operation plan for that particular mine not be approved? Would you be willing to commit to doing that until the litigation's done?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. We have completed our environmental impact statement, more than a decade of analysis, and find that the analysis that supports that decision is sound. I'm aware of the litigation, and as with other litigation that we have across other actions we have in the Forest Service, will allow that to continue to play out. Our approach and standard has been based on our policy that once all permits are received by the operator, we will approve the operations plan.
And the status of that plan, and for that matter, the bonding process for Rosemont, when do you anticipate a decision on both the operations plan and the bond?
So I'll have to get back to you on the bonding process. Again, we will look at approving the operations plan once all the permits are retained by the operator.
And beyond Rosemont mine, could you elaborate for the committee on the Forest Service's position that it does not have the right to say no to a mining activity under the mining law of 1872?
According to the, the 1872 mining law, for those locatable minerals, folks that have viable existing rights or claims, it is our responsibility under that law to move forward with those claims. Our responsibility as an agency is to ensure that the operating plans and the management of the surface activities are aligned with all law, policy, and regulation. And so we go through when we receive those claims and we do a thorough analysis according to the National Environmental Policy Act. We also do our regulatory compliance under the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act to ensure that those activities that are allowable, permittable under the 1872 mining law, that we're doing it in the most responsible way.
But at the end of the day, there would be a plan approved because there cannot be a denial, right?
There is a plan approved according to making sure that it meets all those other laws and statutes and
Yeah,
our
I
land
understand.
management plans.
I understand, Mr. French, and I disagree. I think that there is a lot more latitude to that interpretation for the agency. But just the fact that we have that disagreement on that position, I think is an example of how outdated this mining law of 1872 is. And I think points to the desperate need for reform, to bring it into times where communities, whether they be indigenous, whether they be affected in terms of their living space and their communities, that they be given an opportunity to be at the table, as opposed to now where it's the mines and the industry that's at the table with you and no one else, until we get to the net result, which is usually litigation. So I think, Mr. Chairman, as you go forward, I think this law on many mining decisions continues to be a relic, and a relic that I think needs to be brought into dealing with the new West and dealing with the times that we're in. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence, and yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I now recognize Mr. Huffman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ned, I was just reading an article from a few months back where Secretary Zinke was quoted as saying that the Department of Interior is in the energy business. Do you agree with that characterization of the Department of Interior and by extension, your department?
Thank you, Congressman. I agree that the president certainly has issued an executive order, and I agree that the BLM, a part of the Department of Interior, is a multiple-use agency, which in energy is part of that multiple
Would you
use.
consider yourself in the energy business?
Again, I agree that we have proponents that submit energy-related application to us, and therefore we process those. So by de facto, we are producing energy.
Well, you're a little more subtle than Secretary Zinke, and his failure to appreciate the difference between being a federal agency and being in the business may be one reason he's no longer the Secretary of Interior. But I do think it's important to point out that you're not technically in the energy business, and I think you realize that. You're a regulator. You're a trustee of public land and public resources. There is a difference, and it is significant. Now, I want to ask you about the Arctic Refuge. Does the Department of Interior still intend to hold a lease sale in the Arctic Refuge this year?
My understanding is that they're working on the plans to prepare it, and once those plans are approved, then we will move forward with a sale.
That's not my question. I'm asking very specifically, and I'm asking because Assistant Secretary Bailash has said on multiple times, including just last month, that BLM is still on track to hold the lease sale late this year. What is your current understanding? And please answer the question. It's a very specific and direct question. Are you going to hold the lease sale this year?
Again, Congressman, if that's what Assistant Secretary Bayless said, I presume that's what's happening. Right now, we're
You're not a
processing the
potted
plan.
plant. You're the acting director. I couldn't ask for a better witness to answer a very specific question about the department's intentions for a few months later in the year here. Are you going to hold the lease sale for the Arctic Refuge? That ought to be a yes or no question.
Again, I have no other information, Congressman, other than
You're
what...
the acting director.
I am not the acting director, Congressman. I am the deputy director for operations, and
Okay, my mistake.
in that capacity, we are preparing for a sale.
That's not a
but
potted
again-
plant position either, though.
Say again, Congressman?
That's not a potted plant position either. You're a person in position to know the department's plans.
Absolutely, and again, the department is preparing for a sale, and if our Assistant Secretary said he plans to have it at the end of this year, we're working on that plan, but
All right, so I'm going to take your testimony to be that you are moving forward with a lease sale at the end of this year. Would that be a correct interpretation of what you just said?
I think a correct interpretation is what my Assistant Secretary said.
Oh, you have managed to survive for many years as civil servant, and I'm beginning to appreciate why. Touche. Would you agree that all things being equal, a lease sale brings in more money if there's actual seismic data available to show what's in the ground?
I would say lease sale brings in money based on the market, based on the company's portfolio, so there's a number of factors that does include that.
Again, my question, I'm going to ask you to listen carefully. All things being equal, a lease sale with no seismic data versus a lease sale with seismic data to show what's in the ground, which brings in more money?
I cannot answer that question.
Really?
I don't have the data to say which support, and Congressman, I
You
would.
think oil companies would bid all the same, not knowing what's behind, door number 2? Or having a lease sale where there's actual seismic data to show what's in the ground? I mean, come on now. Let's use a little common sense. You're going to get more value for the American taxpayer if you've got the seismic data to show what's in the ground. Isn't that just obvious?
Well, Congressman, common sense tells me that they will use a number of factors, and so again.
You disagree with what I just said?
I don't disagree with what you said, but again, I said company use a number of factors to determine whether they're going to bid on a lease or not.
You don't disagree. You just said you don't disagree. So let's proceed on a foundation of common sense. You're going to get more value for the American taxpayer if you've done the seismic surveys and you can show what's in the ground so that companies can actually bid with a little bit of information. I think everybody knows that that's the case. But you're not going to be able to do the seismic surveys in the Arctic Refuge this year, correct?
I believe that's the understanding, Congressman.
It's a fact. You're not going to be able to do the seismic surveys this year. And yet, you and the assistant director and others are indicating you plan to move forward anyway with a lease sale that you know is going to bring poor value to the American taxpayers. Mr. Ned, I would suggest that this does reflect this fallacy that you think you're in the energy business, because you're not even trying to get value as a trustee agency for the American taxpayer. You're trying to rush forward a giveaway for the oil and gas industry. And to that, I say shame on you. I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, and I now recognize the ranking member, Representative Gosar, for 5 minutes.
Yes, my friends on the other side of the aisle have often said that the current administration is too aggressive in the energy production and mining on federal lands, that our lands are supposedly up for sale, and that the committee, Republicans, and administration alike are gutting bedrock environmental laws. I'd like to address your attention or draw your attention to the slide where the total amount of federal acres with oil, gas, and coal resources in the western states is compared to the amount of leased for oil, gas, and coal development. Hardly a majority, as you can see here. Only 9% of the federal acres containing oil and gas are currently leased, and only 1% of the federal acres containing coal are currently leased. Hardly a giveaway of our federal lands. Now, Mr. Ned, quick question. The chairman actually asked you a question about a press release versus an illegal opinion. They're not the same, are they?
That is correct, Mr. Ranking Member.
In an illegal opinion, they take a look at all jurisdictions' background that formulated the law. A lot goes into that formulation of that opinion, does it not?
That's my understanding.
Now, going back to my question up here, can you break down for me how many levels of NEPA analysis, oil, gas, coal, or hard rock mineral development is subject to on BLM land?
Mr. Ranking Member, it starts from a resource management plan, and once a proponent submits an activity, there could be a number of additional NEPA analysis. It would be site-specific based on a project, and if there's a modification to that project, there would be additional NEPAs. So there's a number of level of NEPAs.
So they bend over backwards for any type of jurisdictional deference to find and make sure that is heard. Is that true?
True.
How long does that typically take?
Well, it varies, but I should say that with our new secretarial order to expedite or to make certain we process these, we've been striving to complete those as soon as we can, normally a year, but it has taken up to 5, 6, 7 years sometimes.
Gotcha. Now, is there opportunities for local and public comment?
Absolutely.
Now, the chairman of the full committee introduced a bill to permanently withdraw over 1 million acres in northern Arizona. This would take some of our most promising tracts of uranium deposits off the table. As we know, uranium is an incredibly valuable fuel resource and is also highly relevant to national security. In fact, according to the Energy Information Administration, 93% of U.S. demand for uranium was met by foreign sources, including Russia, despite a large domestic supply. Now, can you discuss for me, Mr. Ned, the laws and regulations in place to ensure that uranium mining, or for that matter, any hard rock mining for that matter, will be handled safely and with consideration for the environmental process?
Absolutely, Mr. Ranking Member. Certainly the NEPA, our Energy Policy Act, National Energy Policy Act, requires to do a very detailed and in-depth look at that. There is the Endangered Species Act. There is our Section 106 Cultural Act. And so those are a number of requirements or laws that require us to do a detailed analysis. And prior to moving forward with any project, we have to mitigate any impacts that may become of that.
So air, water, all those things are looked at for modification or for intent of resource.
Absolutely.
So now you're telling me that we can have our access to these minerals and have our safety too? That seems contradictory to me.
Well, again, part of the analysis is to ensure we're doing it in an environmentally sound manner and to employ mitigation or actions to protect water, air, and any other type of impacts.
So the mining impact that we've seen, particularly with uranium, is fairly less invasive. It's a smaller footprint, it's very clean, and actually has some benefits to it, if I'm not mistaken, because of the way the strata or geological formations is formed. When you take this compact breccia pipe out, you actually have better drainage to subsurface reservoirs. Is that not true?
That is my understanding generally, Ms.
That's amazing. Now, well, I'm running out of time, so if we're going to the second round, I'll save it. Okay, so I'll wait till the second round.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Levin for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ned, for your many years of service to BLM, and I mean that sincerely. I'm trying to get a sense of how your mandate may have changed under different administrations. As you know, we saw a huge expansion of renewable energy under the Obama administration. As Mr. Huffman says, you're not in the energy business, but nonetheless, we saw a significant increase on public lands. And in fact, you were credited as a key player in the Obama administration's renewable energy revolution. The falling cost of renewable technology certainly enabled this expansion, but so did the vision of the Obama administration as it pertained to renewables. Last administration ensured clean energy companies understood the expected costs and incentives to develop in areas where conflict with other public lands uses could be minimized. So I'd say that the Trump administration came into office on strong footing to continue the momentum for renewable energy. So a few questions related to that. Mr. Ned, in total, how many solar projects have been approved on public lands by BLM to date?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the number is somewhere around 40.
And how many of those were approved during the Trump administration?
I believe we have approved 2 projects in the last couple of years.
And same with wind. How many wind projects have been approved by the BLM on public lands?
I believe there is one wind project that has been approved.
In total, in your 26 years or 27 years at BLM, how many wind,
I'm sorry,
wind projects?
I misunderstood your question. So I believe there's about 40 wind projects that has been approved since the BLM has been keeping records.
And how many since the Trump administration? That's one?
I believe there's one approved, but there's a number that are in process right now that is ongoing.
So 2 out of 40, 1 out of 40. How have funding and staffing levels changed for your oil and gas, coal, and renewable programs since the Trump administration, as opposed to before?
Certainly, the renewable and the coal and energy program has been relatively flat compared to previous administration. There have been a little bump in oil and gas, but I believe those programs is continued relatively flat.
And would you be willing to provide to the committee documents detailing how funding and staffing levels may have changed for these programs over the past 2 years?
I will take back your request, Congressman.
So if it's not funding and staffing levels, as you said, they're relatively flat, maybe a small bump for oil and gas, how do you account for the significant difference in the percentage of new projects that are renewable versus oil and gas?
Market condition play a big factor in the commercial side of it. So in energy and minerals, I believe the market condition plays a factor, and the BLM takes application from any proponent that comes to it. And so that's part of the conclusion, I believe.
So, Mr. Ned, you're saying that market conditions have so dramatically decreased for renewables in the last 2 years where they're now virtually not competitive, whereas before market conditions determined that they were significantly competitive?
Well, what I'm saying is businesses make decisions on a number of factors, and market condition is one of that. But if a proponent brings an application to the BLM for a renewable energy project, BLM will certainly move forward to determine the completeness of that application and process it.
Well, I think what's happening is more a matter of policy than one of actual market conditions. I don't think that there's any doubt that the Trump administration claims market dominance with regard to fossil fuels, but just the same, all of the good work that you did under the Obama administration with significant new solar, wind, and other clean sources of power now is under direct threat. And it's clear to me that the BLM and Congress need to do more to spur responsible development of clean energy on public lands. We've got to pick up the pace if we're going to reduce our emissions and address the threat of climate change. Very briefly, Mr. Ned, coal leasing. Could you explain the process for providing royalty relief for coal lessees?
So a lessee will submit an application to the BLM outlining the factors for a request for reduction, and the BLM will analyze those factors to determine if or not it exists, and based on those factors, the BLM may or may not grant that royalty reduction.
And I'm out of time, but the Trump administration has granted far more of these royalty reductions than past administrations will, providing no similar relief for renewables. I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Ned.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. We're going to have one more round of questions, so any member will continue in the order that wants to question may do so. I want to continue the discussion that I had about the 2 mineral leases that the administration is currently renewing, which is right next to the Boundary Waters Wilderness area in Minnesota. Mr. French, these leases are on Forest Service land, so you've been heavily involved in this issue?
That's correct.
Thank you. So in January of 2017, the Forest Service said that it's going to do an environmental impact statement for a potential 20-year mineral withdrawal in the area. Is that not correct?
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
So we have the Forest Service doing an environmental impact statement to see whether there should be a 20-year mineral withdrawal. However, a mere 4 months later, 3 months later, in May of 2017, Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue was asked by Congresswoman McCollum about the review, and he said, and I quote, "We are determined to proceed in that effort and let it run its course. No decision will be made prior to the conclusion of that." So he is concluding that they're going to let this review run its course. Do you recall that statement by the Secretary?
So just to correct what I said earlier, actually what we committed to doing was an environmental assessment.
All right, an environmental assessment. And the Secretary also said to a question directly to Congresswoman McCollum that you would determine to proceed in that effort. Is that not true?
The authority for this administrative action is with the Secretary of Agriculture with Perdue.
So the Secretary did say that. But a mere 4 months later, by September of 2018, the Secretary Perdue canceled the mineral withdrawal application. So I ask you, was the environmental review completed in those 3 months, 3 to 4 months?
Thank you, Chairman. As I said, the withdrawal under consideration was
In a year and a half.
was an administrative withdrawal.
So it was administered without completing the environmental assessment.
Yeah, it was essentially, once it was initiated, it was within the purview of the Secretary to withdraw that as it being an administrative withdrawal. He decided, as he stated, that looking at mineral leasing in that area, that we would go forward on a case-by-case basis where we could look at these action sites specifically.
So what you're saying is he made that decision to go forward, and that Secretary Perdue broke a direct commitment to Congresswoman McCollum that they would complete the environmental assessment.
So, Mr. Chairman, I can't speak for the Secretary in that way. What I can say is that he reviewed the material that was in front of him, and this administrative review process for that withdrawal, the application for withdrawal, he made the decision no longer to continue that.
So he makes this decision, and he issued a press release saying that the review did not reveal any new scientific information. Does that mean that the Forest Service had all the relevant scientific information as of the end of 2016?
So for the Secretary to move forward in no longer considering the withdrawal application, he had the information to inform that administrative decision that he needed. As we go forward, looking at any new applications on a case-by-case basis, any scientific information, both in the past and present going forward, will be considered in those decisions.
So he had that information at the end of 2000, the data that was in front of him, because he had the documentation that a large copper sulfide mine could be safely placed right next to the boundary waters. Can you give me then the documentation that he used from the Obama administration where the Forest Service concludes that the science shows that this mining can be done safely? Can you give us, can you document if he's now saying he is moving forward on this?
So respectfully, Mr. Chairman, the administrative process here was a withdrawal, not the actual mine itself. That's under a different process, the renewal process that the BLM is carrying forward. We're aware of the request, and we're working on our response. I believe we have a meeting set up next week with committee staff to continue working on how we're going to respond to that request.
Well, when you do, can you provide us with any documentation that shows that by the end, December of 2016, that this mining can be done safely?
Again, this was about the administrative withdrawal, not about the actual mine itself, and we are working towards a response on that.
Thank you, and I yield back.
So, Mr. French, let's go back through this. So in particularly this boundary water buffer area, Superior National Forest, was that done by executive fiat or was it done by congressional intent?
The
original withdrawal, the original monument, the designation.
So the withdrawal that that I'm being asked about right now was...
No, I know where you're going, but okay. This needs background. It was actually Congress that actually designated this monument, not a president.
The boundary waters.
Yep.
That's correct.
And so it's the boundary waters, a buffer area, and the Superior National Forest, is it not?
That is correct.
Does any other monument have a buffer area?
I'd have to get back to you.
No, the answer is no.
But I'm not aware of one.
No, so it's up to Congress. Now, my colleagues on the other side are so worried about executive overreach that they can't see that this was an executive overreach by the Obama administration. I mean, literally, as he's walking out of the office, he does a withdrawal. So my whole point is that Congress used its best wisdom and in judgment to build this. This has nothing to do with the boundary waters, the Superior. There were contracts put in place. In fact, Congress verified it twice. That's what's so key here, is that that's the problem aspect. Now, I want to ask you a little bit. Now, I'm very familiar with this. Are the people in Minnesota asking for any variances about safety, environmental processing about this mine?
Not that I'm aware.
No, in fact, they want to do it by the letter of the law. In fact, their mining is exquisite. The taconite mining, you're very aware of this in this area. In fact, people line up to take over abandoned taconite mines, right? Because it produces the best, cleanest water in Minnesota.
I'll go with your statement on that.
It is absolutely true. They're gorgeous, the remediation. We actually had the folks from back home do a video that we actually played in this committee to actually see that. You know, pictures are worth 1,000 words, and from that standpoint, we got to get back to facts. Now, some people want to have that administration intercedence when it benefits them, but this is not a right application. Now, with the withdrawal area, did the Obama administration do their NEPA?
No, they initiated the process.
That's exactly right. Okay, so once again, an Article 1 breach. Congress has bestowed this piece of property in Minnesota as a national monument. They verified it several times. And so what the other side is breaching about is something that they're claiming with this president is wrong. So now, Mr. Ned, when we talk about renewable energies, they have the same problem that oil and gas does with NEPA, don't they?
I would say there's the same challenges.
That's exactly right. I would love to have the gentleman that was just here, Mr. Levin, to join on our public lands renewable energy bill that actually streamlines that process, identifying public lands that could be used for these alternative energies. You're aware of that, right?
I am.
Yeah, so I mean, when you start looking at the cherry picking, particularly at the front end of this process for desirable lands for public use in renewables, that's very easy. But now we're into the part which makes it very, very tough to get those certifications for that process, right?
I would say we're in the high conflict or the challenging areas.
And once again, public lands are a harder venue to work in than is private and state lands, right?
I believe most would agree with that.
So 98% of renewables, whether it be wind and solar, are on private and state land, are they not?
I don't have the exact figures, but I would say a large amount is.
And part of the reason why is a lot of the onerous processes. Now, do the states do a worse job than the federal government?
I don't think the federal government does a worse job, but the state does doesn't do a hardest job as the federal government.
Well, politics are always done best at the local level, right, Mr. Ned?
I believe that's what many people have said.
And if there was a problem, the local people would be able to be part of that, wouldn't they?
I suspect that is the case.
Not necessarily, you know, everything is done right back here in Washington, D.C. Last time I looked, it seems to be the problem, not the solution. Would you agree?
Again, there's challenges all around Congressman or ranking member.
Yeah, well, you know, I want to thank everybody for coming here because what it's all about is all the above on energy development. When you have a portfolio that's blessed with what America has been given, it is no thought process that shouldn't be geopolitically making our influence around the world for the good that this country does, and energy starts that process. So I want to thank all the panelists for coming today, and thanks for your expertise.
Mr. Chairman, may I correct the record with something I said before, please?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Levin was asking on the number of energy development, and I may have incorrectly stated that we approve one wind, and I wanted to correct that. We have 2 solar projects, 0 wind, and geothermal, so I just wanted to correct that. We have not approved a wind project.
Thank you, Mr. Ned. I also want to continue this line of questioning just for one more time. And I want to say when we're talking about the President Obama's canceling the 2 leases right next to the boundary waters, it was said that by my colleague that the overreach by the executive overreach. Well, I will say I am not, and I don't think the members on my colleagues on this side of the aisle are worried about. The concern is executive overreach. What we're worried about, And I think that's the focus of this hearing, is protecting the boundary waters. That's what we're worried about. And that's why, you know, we have raised this issue to, now. What I'd like to do, though, and in my last question, is turn to the gentleman from the Power Administration, and my question is, in the aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria, WAPA and BPA sent crews to help Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands to restore energy infrastructure on the island so that the citizens of the island could have their power restored. Can either one of you tell us more about exactly what you did and how you helped in that issue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's one of our, I think, WAPA's proudest moments. In Puerto Rico, we sent advisors and engineers to help with the restoration. In St. Thomas in particular, we had crews that were on the ground for 64 days, more than 40 men and women restoring the transmission backbone of what was really a battered island. What was more amazing, and I had the opportunity to go down and be with our crews, for the first 10 days or so, there was literally no supplies for them to do that. So these men and women were out literally pulling poles out of the jungle, picking lines up off the ground to restore the power. I will say our folks did it an amazing job. The transmission backbone now in St. Thomas is up to WAPA standards, which we believe will be particularly strong should there be another hurricane down there.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Mainzer, do you want to add anything to that?
We had a similar experience, a number of individuals down in the early stages of the hurricanes helping to restore power and get the system up and running. I think it's consistent with the ethic of the utility industry. We help our friends out when they're in times of need, and I think it made a big difference, and we were happy to be part of it.
Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Legg, if Southeastern Power Administration or Mr. Way, the Southwestern, had any role in this. Can you, but if you did, would you like to state anything?
Southeastern Power Administration has no transmission resources and no personnel that could support the restoration in that manner.
Thank you. Mr. Way?
We, Southwestern, just provided some engineering consulting to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during the hurricanes, but that was off-site at our local area, so we did not participate on the ground there in Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back. Would you like to? Thank you, Ms.
Well, first of all, Mr. Gabriel, I want to thank you for supporting our Transparency Act with WAPA. That was unanimously and transparency, and I think Sunlight does a great opportunity for our people to understand where their dollars are going. So I want to thank you very much in public on that. I want to come back to you, Mr. Ned. And there's a reason I bring this back up, is that no other national monument has a buffer area. Congress, in its wisdom, understood the value of the boundary waters and established that buffer area for the very environmental protections that they want to instill. Minnesotans are not people that want to have dirty water, dirty air, and contamination sites. They're very forward-thinking, and I think from the standpoint that we're going to admonish them, they're embracing the process. They want to follow the letter of the law. And who is it to Congress to step in? The law is on the books. It's been ratified twice by Congress. Now, allow the people to be emboldened to actually embrace it and build their jobs. That's the case. This has never happened before, and it hasn't happened since, that we've had a buffer area. So this notoriety of, oh, we're worried about the boundary waters. We're all worried about the boundary waters. But I think Congress, in its special intention to this area, built that buffer area, and that's an important jurisdiction. I've been very involved in this issue. This is something about putting laws on the books and making sure that we're upholding that and holding people to that same standard. You know, we see it not only in Minnesota, but we see it up in Arizona. That's a travesty. And when we see particularly our critical mineral issues being reliant on foreign countries like China, That's hardly a state of play for our technology, our new advancements in technology. So from that standpoint, I would hope that the administration continues their onslaught to make sure that the process is streamlined, but making sure that we can actually have our environment, our minerals, and our cake to go with it. It's not mutually exclusive. I want to thank the chairman for having this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, and just in conclusion, I'll give you another a chance if you want to respond also. I'd just like to say two final points, that in 2018, when we discussed the boundary waters and with Mr. Emmer's bill, I will point out that the other Republican representative from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson, eloquently spoke against the additional leases for mining, talking about his own experiences growing up, rafting and canoeing in the boundary waters, and did not want to see any mining next to it. That was the Republican member. And the other one is that recent polling in Minnesota does not support the people wanting the issuance of any mining leases.
Well, I will take the tick for tack. You know, Mr. Emmers, Mr. Paulson does not live in the area. Rick Nolan, the gentleman who actually represented the area at the time, a Democrat, facilitated part of that discussion on the ground with the townspeople. You know, when we start talking about polling, you can gerrymander. I have a pretty good math background. It depends upon how you ask the question as to how you get a response. So I think we have to be careful about how we poll people, making sure they get a full directive of what we're asking. I'll give you an example. We were talking about the Northern Arizona Grand Canyon, making it a national monument. When everybody heard the first polling, 90% of people in Arizona said, we got to do that. But when they found out that it was going to limit their access, grazing, timber sales, energy extraction, it plummeted. It plummeted to less than 50%. So that just shows you when you ask a question, you have to be careful and make sure the public is empowered with all the information. So with that being said, I yield back.
Thank the witnesses for their testimony and the members for their questions, especially about polling, even though that 70% of the people of Minnesota oppose.
Doubt it.
But I would like to say that any members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these, to the members, to the panelists. I would like you to respond to these in writing under Committee Rule 3. Members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days following these responses. If there are no further business, without objection, the committee now stands adjourned.